Greg, I wanted to ask you, how does stem cell therapy play into maybe the regeneration of the thymus gland?
Yeah, so there's several dimensions to that question. So the first dimension is that the thymus is fairly similar to other stem cell stories or different depending upon how you look at it. So the way it's similar is that if you take the example of muscle regeneration, for example, if I stick a bunch of needles into your arm at the age of 90, and then I take a biopsy of your arm to see how well your muscle repairs itself, it does a pretty poor job. I do the same experiment on you when you're 20, your muscle may repair itself to the point where I can hardly even tell that you got jabbed. And the reason for that difference is that in your old muscle, you have satellite stem cells. They're called satellite cells. They're stem cells that regenerate the muscle. They're sitting there in your muscle ready to go, but they don't have the right signals to do anything. So you don't get a repaired muscle. But if you get, let's say, a transfusion of young blood in sufficient quantities or perform similar maneuvers, then you'll discover, at least if you're similar to rat studies that have been done, that your muscle can now regenerate using the same stem cells it already had, but it lacked the signals that it needed. So there may be losses of stem cells with age as well, but the point I'm driving at is that stem cell function depends on the commandments that it gets from the rest of the body as well, namely the signals as to whether it should be active or inactive. And just like the muscle, you have similar issues with signaling in the thymus. So the difference is that the thymus receives signals to shut itself down about the time of puberty. And mouse studies have shown that if you transplant stem cells from adults into older mice, it does not regrow the thymus. And even if you transplant stem cells from young mice into old mice, it still does not regenerate the thymus. You can get to regenerate if you transplant cells from something like a 3-day-old mouse. If you do it at the age of 2 days, it doesn't work. If you do it at the age of 4 days, it doesn't work. It's got to be exactly the right window, and that's because during early development, prepubescent development, your thymus is programmed to grow, so all the stem cells involved are turned on and ready to go. But then there's a switch that's activated when you go through puberty that shuts everything down. And so you can put in all the stem cells that you want, but just like the old muscle, they're not going to get the signals that they need to turn back on again. So overcoming that is doable, but it's going to take more time. And that's one of the things we'd like to do in the future. There are also some tricks that we might be able to use to convince the stem cells that you already have to reactivate using some pretty sneaky techniques that I'm not going to discuss right now. But it's very, very speculative and it might not work. So we'd like to get a little bit more backing before we go down that route. So for the moment, we have a technology that seems to work now. We'd like to enhance it. We'd like to find alternatives for it. But the thing that drives us kind of is that everybody's dying of aging right now. And, we could devote ourselves to something that would take 5 or 10 years to develop. But what do we do about people that need help immediately? And so we're diving into what works right now, and we're still keeping all of these other modalities in mind for deployment later on. But so your question is perfect. Stem cells regenerate and repair just about everything. But this is a very special case. And so it's going to require some very special techniques. So we're actually looking at several different ways of dealing with that kind of thing. But for the moment, we're just doing the obvious thing, which is to try to recapitulate the state in which your body was when you were young and your thymus was in a more growth-oriented situation. So when you're young, you have a lot of growth hormone and you have a lot of DHEA, and we're supplying those back, and we're finding that that is sufficient to generate enough thymus regeneration to repopulate your body with young T cells. And so that's very exciting, at least based on our TRIIM trial, which of course is a very small number of people, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of caveats, but that's the angle we're following.
And what about some of the peptides? You came in late, but what about some of the peptides like thyma, alpha-1 and that might target the thymus that that in conjunction with growth hormone.
Yeah, so thymosin alpha 1 is a peptide made by the thymus. I'm not sure that it actually doesn't regenerate the thymus. The thymus makes it, and then it goes on and does other good things. But whether it actually helps the thymus, I'm not sure about. The trouble with all of those peptides is that none of them are FDA approved, and it's going to require a lot of time, money, and effort to go through the process of looking at things like that in sufficient depth to get them into clinical use. So there are many interesting possibilities along the lines, those sorts of lines. But like I said, we're sort of engaging in a multi-tier approach to this, in which we start off with what we can do now, and then we work our way up to other things later. But yes, there are hormones that can stimulate thymus regeneration other than growth hormone that are more specific. But so far, nobody's been able to use them in a way that doesn't cause systemic toxicity. There have been people that have been looking at this for a long time, and they haven't really gotten to the finish line yet. So we agree with the idea. It's just a matter of when we can phase it in. So, of course, if we're able to succeed with what we're doing now, then of course we're going to bring in more and more powerful technologies as we're able to afford to do.
Well, say what you have on hand. What would be, and maybe you found this through your research, maybe the optimal time for a person to start, say, a growth hormone therapy or DHEA therapy? Would it be in their 60s or early 70s or even 50s, so they can get ahead of the curve?
That's an excellent question. We would dearly love to know the answer. I can tell you what we know so far. So our original trial was done with people who were 50 to 65. And within that age window, we did not find any difference in the ability to regenerate the thymus, or in the ability to generate new T cells, or in the ability to go backwards in biological time based on all these biological clocks of aging that we measured. So that's pretty exciting. And if you compare that to what you see in rat studies say that if you intervene before the median lifespan is reached, which for humans is late 70s to basically late 70s, then you can totally regenerate the thymus. And if you wait longer than that, then regenerate the thymus, and you can still get a very powerful immune system benefits, but you don't do as well. So we think that the best time to intervene is as soon as possible, but not too soon. So to try to make some sense out of that statement, what I mean is I wouldn't recommend this for anybody under the age of 40, which is why the TRIIM-X trial is only admitting people between the ages of 40 and 80. And if I had my guess, I would say that probably the optimum time to intervene is probably around 45 or so, 45 to 55, but we don't really know that. So it's speculation at this point. All I can say is that I started this by doing experiments on myself when I was 46, and things seemed to work a little bit easier when I was 46 than when I was 56 or whatever. So I suspect that things will be easier and faster and more complete if you're a little bit younger. But I think there's hope for people even out to the age of 80.